High school graduate, really? Everyone in our department has a college degree, you know? When Jake, who was much younger than me, reacted with surprise, I gave a wry smile. He's fine. A beautiful voice came from behind me. In front of me, Jake's eyes widened in astonishment. I slowly turned around. There stood a beautiful woman in a pale pink suit. My name is Henry. I'm 50 years old. Today is the company's Christmas party. Though I'm not yet working at the main office. I've been working at a local subsidiary for many years, but I'm set to transfer to the main office in January. When I got the call about the transfer, Ms. Taylor, the president, suggested I attend the Christmas party. Since it was scheduled the day after my move, I agreed to attend without hesitation. Wow, it's huge. I stood hesitant in front of the large hotel where the party was being held. The Christmas party was to be a standing buffet in the hotel's grand ballroom. I timidly stepped into the hotel and headed to the reception desk. The paper I received at the reception looked like a wedding seating chart. It seemed there were tables for each department. I was assigned to the System Development Department at the main office. Alternating glances between the grand ballroom and the paper, I headed toward my table. The party was set to start at 6 p.m., but at 5:40 p.m., many people had already gathered and were chatting happily. People of all ages were having fun conversations, but I felt a bit intimidated looking at my table. Everyone looked young. They seemed to be in their 20s or 30s. Are there no people my age here yet? Feeling a bit uneasy, I approached the table, and a young man noticed me. He stared at me intently. Under his gaze, I decided to introduce myself. Excuse me. I'm Henry, set to join the System Development Department next month. Nice to meet you. When I greeted them, several people introduced themselves to me. The young colleague who had been staring at me also spoke up. I'm Jake. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you? Since he asked timidly, I confidently replied, I'm 50. Exclamations of surprise came from various places, and Jake was especially astonished. 50. You'll be the oldest in our department. Have you done something amazing? Where have you been until now? He bombarded me with questions. I smiled wryly and explained that I hadn't done anything special and had been working at a local subsidiary. Jake frowned. Are you sure? Honestly, the workload here is intense. I studied programming all through college and worked hard in related activities. But even I struggle with the main office's work. He mentioned that he graduated from a well-known college. If such an eager young person says it's intense, it must be quite a workload. I braced myself a bit. Well, I guess an old high school graduate like me will have to work extra hard. When I said that, Jake's eyes widened. High school graduate, really? Everyone in our department has a college degree. Even our manager Mark is in his early 40s. Realizing what he had said, Jake lowered his voice. Did you maybe mess up at the subsidiary? An old high school graduate among young college graduates. Feel free to ask me anything. I'll help you out. He seemed to have misunderstood something. As he said that, Jake extended his right hand to me. He's probably not a bad kid. I smiled wryly and reached out to shake his hand. At that moment, he's fine. A beautiful voice came from behind me. In front of me, Jake's eyes widened in astonishment. I slowly turned around. There stood the president of the company, Ms. Taylor, dressed in a pale pink suit. She was 40, 10 years younger than me, but had a youthful, vibrant complexion. Her distinct double eyelids and slightly drooping eyes gave her a gentle appearance, and her lightly colored lips had a touch of deep red. With her good posture and slim legs, she looked great in heels. It's been a while. I greeted her. She looked slightly flustered. Henry. I've been looking forward to seeing you. Her eyes were slightly moist. Surprised by our interaction, Jake asked for an explanation. I smiled wryly and recalled the past. I joined this company right after graduating high school. I still remember how my heart raced when I first touched a computer in middle school. Using all my saved money, I bought a bulky, old-fashioned computer and started programming from a textbook. It was more fun than I had imagined, and my heart soared. My parents, who were busy with their jobs, naturally assumed I would go to a general high school and then to college. But I wanted to attend a technical high school. My parents said I could study engineering in college, but I insisted on studying computers right away. It was my paternal grandmother, who raised me in place of my busy parents, who persuaded them. She said, "I've never seen Henry so passionate. If he has something he loves, parents should support him." With her help, I convinced my parents. Graduating at the top of my class from the technical high school, I was recommended by the school and got a job at a top-tier company. Although it meant leaving my hometown, my grandmother was very happy. At 32, a turning point came. Ms. Taylor, the president's daughter, joined the company, and I, then in the systems department, became her mentor. I had heard that she was the only daughter of the president and would eventually take over the company. So, she was rotating through various departments to learn. I've studied in many departments, but this is really interesting. I want to learn more and more. With sparkling eyes, she eagerly learned programming languages. I taught her the work with a light-hearted feeling. She stayed in the systems department for about 6 months, and in that time, we became good friends, secretly going out for meals together. I had a faint crush on her. What I loved most was her bright smile and curiosity about everything. But she was a young and beautiful president's daughter. There was no way my feelings could reach her. I spent my days hiding my feelings, content to be her confidant. Then, my parents passed away. They were involved in a multi-car accident while out shopping on a weekend. In a daze, I confirmed their bodies and prepared for the funeral with the help of relatives. I noticed my grandmother's strange behavior on the night of the wake. "Where is Michael?" Suddenly, my grandmother called out my father's name. I had been staying up all night as I couldn't sleep, with my grandmother sleeping nearby. Ever since my parents' accident, my grandmother had been crying constantly, and when I arrived, she seemed to have shrunk in size. "Grandma! Dad is all ready." I began to tell her, my face grim. But my grandmother looked at me and smiled. "Oh, Michael, there you are." My drowsiness vanished in an instant. "Grandma? Do you know who I am?" When I asked in a panic, there was a brief pause before she sadly said, "Oh. Henry, you came." I felt slightly relieved, but her behavior continued to be strange at times. After the funeral, I took her to the hospital, where they said it was likely temporary confusion caused by the shock of losing her son and daughter-in-law. However, given her age, there was a risk of her developing dementia, and they advised not to leave her alone. So I requested a month off from work, which was granted. If it was just temporary shock, they expected improvement within a month. As Dr. Mitchell predicted, her strange behavior gradually improved, but her face always seemed sad. As the month was coming to an end, she forced a smile and said, "Henry, I've caused you trouble. And your company too. I'm okay now. So go back to work." Though her smile still seemed a bit precarious, I couldn't take more time off work, so I returned. But I couldn't focus, worried about my grandmother, and started making mistakes. Emily was worried about me and invited me out for dinner. It was embarrassing to have someone I had feelings for, 10 years younger, worry about me. But I wanted to lean on her. I talked about my grandmother. Should I quit my job? Should I go back to the countryside? I voiced my doubts and, taking advantage of the counter seating, rested my head on her shoulder. When I tried to gently hold her hand, it was wet. I hurriedly looked at Emily. She was crying. As I panicked, she said through her tears, "I think you should go back to your grandmother." I felt the same. I thought I had no choice. I wanted someone to push me. But I didn't want it to come from Emily. It felt like I was being rejected, even though I hadn't confessed my feelings. Through her falling tears, she said, "I'll be sad if you leave, but right now, I think your grandmother needs you more than anyone." Could I take her endless tears as a sign that she had some feelings for me? I quietly closed my eyes and said, "Thank you. I'll go back to her." I never confessed my feelings to Emily. And so, I returned to my hometown. However, thanks to Emily's intervention, I was transferred to a related subsidiary there. I was grateful to Emily. Although it was in the countryside, the subsidiary was a system development company, so I could continue doing the work I loved, albeit on a smaller scale. Emily smiled faintly and said, "Your knowledge and skills are too valuable to waste. Do your best over there." With her words in mind, I worked at the subsidiary for nearly 20 years while living with my grandmother. Then a few months ago, my grandmother passed away. When Emily contacted me hearing the news, I was surprised. "You're still an employee, even at the subsidiary," she said, showing her remarkable efficiency. At that time, she also suggested I return to the main office. Naturally, I hesitated. I had been peacefully doing system development in the countryside. I didn't think I could handle the hustle and bustle of the city anymore. But Emily playfully said over the phone, "Don't be so modest. The systems you've developed are all excellent, and some have even won awards, right? I know these things." Her teasing tone made me feel flustered. As I organized my grandmother's funeral and cleaned up the house, I pondered the idea of transferring to the main office. Inside me, a feeling was swelling up. I wanted to challenge myself in a tough environment once more. I wanted to be in the city's atmosphere again. I wanted to work with Emily again. After some thought, I called Emily. "Is the transfer to the main office still on the table?" My hesitant voice made her laugh on the other end of the line. "Of course." Buoyed by her cheerful response, I decided to return to the main office. I summarized the story, naturally omitting my feelings for Emily. To Jake and the others in the system development department who would be my colleagues starting in January. Everyone looked wide-eyed. So, unlike you guys who had privileged environments, I honed my skills in a more challenging setting. Every time a new programming language came out, I learned it desperately. "I won't lose to you youngsters yet." I said this, patting my chest. For some reason, everyone gave me a light round of applause. Looking at Emily, she raised the corner of her mouth in a grin. We planned for Henry to eventually serve as the head of the system development department. Her bombshell announcement surprised both me and my colleagues. "What about Mark?" Jake asked, confused, and Emily smiled. "Mark has always wanted to transfer to a different department. He wants to get into AI. If Henry becomes the head, we can grant Mark's wish." The right person for the right job. Both the previous president and Emily had always supported what the employees wanted to do. "Well, I have other departments to greet, so I'll be off." As she left, Emily squeezed my hand. "Henry, I look forward to working with you starting next month." With that, she left. In my hand, there was a piece of paper. In the restroom, I quietly opened it to find a map and the name of a restaurant. 2 hours later, the Christmas party ended. "Henry, let's go to the after party." Jake, quite drunk, invited me, but I declined and hurried to the place indicated on the map. It was a bar in a basement. As I hesitated to enter, someone spoke to me. It was Emily. "I'm glad you came. Let's go in." Her invitation made my heart leap. Come to think of it, it's been a long time since we were alone together. Memories of our dinners together nearly 20 years ago resurfaced. I felt my cheeks flush but snapped out of it. What is a 50-year-old man thinking? I pushed aside my sweet feelings and entered the bar. We sat in a small, cozy space. In front of the comfortable chairs was a small round table. A slight partition gave the space a private, intimate atmosphere. The sweet feelings I had pushed away began to swell again. We toasted, and I felt nervous. "Henry?" Suddenly, being called by her made my heart skip a beat. Ms. Taylor?" When I said that, Emily pouted. "I don't like being called that." She gave me a pointed look, making me flustered. "Well, then, Emily?" When I said that, Emily smiled contentedly. "That brings back memories. You were the only one who called me that." Her words triggered my memory. "But you asked me to call you Emily back then. You didn't like being called by your last name or with an honorific." Defending myself with the recalled memory, Emily replied, even though I asked. "Everyone else still called me Ms. Taylor or the president's daughter. You were the only one who called me by my first name." It made me happy. Her words made me blush. Noticing my reddening face, Emily laughed. "I'm glad you came back. I've always wanted to work with you again." As she said this, she took a sip of her cocktail. The liquid she had sipped passed down her throat. It seemed oddly sensual, making me hastily gulp down my whiskey. "Tell me more about your time in the countryside," she requested, and I began recounting my life with my grandmother. At first, my grandmother felt guilty about my return, but once we started living together, her strange behavior ceased and she smiled more often. She had always been my staunch supporter. When I was lonely as a child, she would sleep beside me, and despite her age, she took me to the park. I wanted her to live a long, healthy life. I buried my lingering feelings for Emily and my desire for fulfilling work in the city. We led a peaceful, though unexciting, life. One day, my grandmother suddenly collapsed and passed away. It happened in the small garden she tended as a hobby. It was early morning, before the harsh summer sun. When I woke up lazily, my grandmother was unusually absent. She was always there to prepare breakfast. Feeling uneasy, I went to the garden and found her lying there. She had passed away as if in her sleep. According to Dr. Mitchell, it was heat stroke. Despite the cool early morning, she had become dehydrated. Dr. Mitchell said she must have lost consciousness quietly, as if falling asleep. That was my only solace. If she hadn't suffered, then it was okay. I felt surprisingly calm, perhaps because of the conversation we had the day before her death. We had a habit of drinking coffee and talking a little every night. That day, my grandmother suddenly expressed her gratitude. "Henry, thank you. I'm happy because you're here." Her sudden gratitude made me laugh to hide my embarrassment. "What's with the suddenness?" My grandmother took a sip of coffee and smiled. "When you were born, your parents were busy, and I was left with all the babysitting. I used to think every day, I can't handle this mischievous boy. But when you grew up and left for the city, I realized that you gave me a purpose. Because of you, I could live happily. When you came back, I felt guilty but also extremely happy. But Henry, I'm okay now. If you have something you want to do, go and do it. It's your life, don't have regrets." Her words made me laugh. "I'm always living the way I want. I'm here because I want to be, and besides, your cooking is the best," I said, laughing it off. I wonder if she knew it was our farewell. Did she say those things so I wouldn't have any regrets? It was perfect timing. "Grandma, you are amazing." As I arranged her funeral, I looked up at the clear sky and said this with a clear voice. And now, several months have passed. Winter arrived in no time. I finished my story and downed the rest of my whiskey. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. "I'm glad the decision we made that day was the right one," she said with a smile. "Yeah, thank you." I was able to see my grandmother off without regrets. I expressed my gratitude, and Emily narrowed her eyes. Seeing her expression, I let my true feelings slip out. But I was lonely. "I missed seeing you, Emily." My words made Emily blush slightly. "When I went back to the countryside, I tried not to think about you, tried not to get any information about you. However, as a subsidiary employee, I still received information about the main office. When I heard that Mr. Taylor had retired and become chairman and that Emily, still in her 30s, had become president, I couldn't help but take action. A few years ago, when Emily became president, I sent a congratulatory bouquet. Anonymously. I sent the flowers with the thought that it would be enough for them to be by her side, even if only for a moment. That was my sentiment when I sent them. "Of course, it was you, Henry," Emily murmured contentedly. "Of course." Emily spoke joyfully. "Somehow, just somehow, when I saw that anonymous bouquet, I thought of you. I wasn't sure, so I couldn't reach out." Then, she gazed at me. "Now that I think about it, thank you for the beautiful bouquet. The colors were lovely and conveyed your supportive feelings. So, look." Emily showed me her phone screen. There was the bouquet I had agonized over with the florist. The next screen showed the same flowers preserved in a glass case. As I looked confused, Emily laughed. "They're called preserved flowers. They're specially processed to last a long time." I sent the flowers hoping it would be by her side even for only a moment. Those flowers I sent remain by her side even now. A warm feeling surged in my chest. When I decided to return to the countryside, there was something I couldn't say. Can I say it now? I looked directly into Emily's eyes. I loved you, Emily. And I still do. Since parting ways back then, I had never been able to let go of my feelings for Emily. And I've remained single all these years. Although, to be honest, it's also because I wasn't very popular. Emily blushed deeply. So, back then, you had feelings for me? I nodded yes in response. Emily covered her face with both hands. Thank goodness, you didn't tell me back then. Unsure of her true feelings, I stayed silent. If you had told me then, I wouldn't have been able to let you go back to your grandmother. No, I definitely couldn't have, definitely. She exhaled deeply, then removed her hands from her face and looked at me. I also have something I couldn't say back then. I loved you, Henry. And of course, I still do. Emily's confession mirrored mine. I was utterly surprised. I've always loved you, couldn't forget about you. I acted strong and arranged for you to be assigned to the subsidiary. But I truly wanted you to stay by my side and marry you. Even though I was busy with work, I turned down all the arranged marriage meetings. Because I couldn't forget about you. She explained that her parents had pressured her to marry and produce an heir. Actually, my father never insisted on keeping the company in the family. But he did want me to get married. And somehow, I've reached 40. I was beyond surprised, I was astounded. It's understandable why anyone would think that a bright, beautiful, and kind person like Emily would be someone I'd always remember fondly. But why had she kept thinking about someone as unremarkable as me? I couldn't quite grasp it. When I voiced this, Emily pouted. To me, you're my ideal man. You worked passionately, were skilled, listened to me patiently, and valued your grandmother. But most importantly, embarrassed by her exaggerated praise, I looked at her as she paused. Back then, people used to say I was just the president's daughter dabbling in various jobs. But I wanted to understand every employee's work and hear their suggestions for improvement. Even though spending just 6 months in each department might not seem like much, I was only given simple tasks in other departments. But you treated me like any other junior colleague and taught me the job thoroughly. I was surprised to hear that Emily had been treated that way in other departments. Looking back, I did remember teaching her all the details. I enjoyed seeing her absorb knowledge and felt joy in her enthusiasm. Because you were so eager and bright-eyed, I couldn't help it, I said, blushing. Emily smiled warmly. The way you called me, taught me, and treated me like everyone else made me very happy. It seemed that not treating her differently had actually drawn her to me. Emily chuckled. Henry, you treat everyone equally. Whether it's someone like Jake, who was rude at the Christmas party, or someone like me, the president's daughter. That's something I find very special. She smiled at me, making my heart swell. Seeing my reaction, she laughed and leaned her cheek on her hand resting on the small round table. She was now a little closer. If you keep dragging this on, we'll both be 40. Will you take responsibility? She asked, looking up at me with her head on her hand. I gently patted her head. If you're okay with an old guy like me, anytime. At that moment, she blushed deeply, her face turning as red as a boiled octopus. And then, this is a bit embarrassing to ask at 40, but, as she spoke, her face turned increasingly red. Could you say well done and pat my head? Feeling a bit embarrassed myself, I followed her request. Well done, you really did great, I said, gently patting her head. Watching Emily cover her face in embarrassment, I thought about her. She had carried the heavy responsibility of being the company's president. I hoped I could ease her burden, even a little, and be someone she could lean on. Looking at Emily still adorable as ever, I smiled. 2 years later, I held her hand, offering words of encouragement as she struggled. Since then, we had gotten engaged rather quickly and visited Emily's parents. Her father, now the chairman, remembered me. He acknowledged my efforts after losing my parents and taking care of my grandmother, and entrusted Emily to me. Though we hadn't explicitly discussed it, I didn't think we'd have children. I thought we would live peacefully together. However, to our surprise, a child naturally came into our lives. Emily, now a high-risk pregnancy due to her age, took great care of her health. Her father, who had been chairman, returned to active duty. The employees were very supportive as well. Even today, when I received a sudden call that Emily had gone into labor, Jake, who had become a close friend since the Christmas party, told me, "What are you doing here? I'll handle the work. Go quickly. I'm sure my parents and grandmother are watching over us from heaven. Hang in there. Everyone is cheering for you," I said to Emily. At that moment, Dr. Johnson's voice echoed, "Okay, relax, you've done well," followed by the strong cries of a healthy baby. Emily and I looked at each other, then at our newborn. A little angel had come into our lives. A tiny life, born with everyone's hopes and dreams. Looking at the shining new life in my arms, I vowed to cherish this happiness and live my life without letting it slip away. I made this promise as I gazed at our newborn's radiant face.